all language is encoded in fundamental repeating units to convey meaning. For a spoken language, those units are sounds. This is the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. It's a collection of every sound from every known language on Earth. No language could possibly have all of these sounds, or even most of these sounds, but there's no sound the human vocal tract can produce consistently that isn't featured somewhere on this chart. Every language will have what's called a sound inventory, or chart that displays exactly what sounds are present, all of which are written in the standardized IPA notation. For your language, the very first thing you'll want to do is make a sound chart of your own. Have a look through the IPA and see what sounds you like. Very conveniently, Wikipedia provides audio files for most of these sounds, so you can hear exactly what they're like before you include them. If you want your language to sound like any real-world language in particular, you can also look up the language and see its own chart. Be aware that the symbols that the IPA uses to represent a sound may not be the same as the ones that English uses. For example, even though this sound is represented with the letter J, it actually stands for the sound Y, whereas this, and this are actually J, Ch, and Sh. Some sounds are much rarer than others. For example, as English speakers, we're familiar with the sounds th, as in think, and the, as in this. But it turns out these are both pretty rare cross-linguistically. The uvular stop, h, found in Arabic, Mayan, and some Inuit languages, is also quite rare, and the lateral affricate kl, found in Nahuatl and Navajo, is even rarer than that. If you're making a fictional universe featuring many languages, it's good to be aware of these and keep the relative cross-linguistic frequencies of these sounds in mind. If you're having trouble thinking of what sounds you'd like to include, try coining some sample words that you like the sound of and listing the sounds that they contain. But it's not as simple as grabbing any random sounds that tickle our fancy. We're dealing with a naturalistic conlang here, and all natural languages share some features in common, and in terms of phonology, one very strong tendency is sound symmetry. In the IPA, the columns indicate where in the mouth the sound is produced, starting at the very front with both the lips, and moving back towards the glottis. The rows represent the way the sound is produced, whether it's a stop, produced by completely obstructing airflow, a fricative, produced by leaving a small gap for air to hiss or buzz through, an affricate, produced by initially obstructing airflow in the same manner as a stop before releasing it in the same way as a fricative, a nasal, produced by letting some air pass through the nose, or a liquid, produced by slightly changing the contour of the unrestricted airway. Any natural language is likely to have more than one sound in any given row or column. There may be one or two exceptions, but for the most part, the sounds present in a language should come in a series. For example, we would never expect to see a natural language that features these sounds, whereas something like this is much more likely to occur naturally. Notice how all of these spaces on the chart contain two symbols. The ones on the right are voiced, meaning they require the use of the vocal cords, while the ones on the left are voiceless. All of these sounds are collectively called obstruents. All natural languages in the world feature at least some voiceless obstruents, but not all natural languages have voiced obstruents. If a language has a voiced version of an obstruent, then it will very likely have its voiceless equivalent. These sounds are called resonants or sonorants. All languages in the world will feature at least some voiced resonants, but voiceless resonants are exceedingly rare. Among consonants, resonants include nasals like ma and na, and liquids like ra and la. Any natural language is very likely to include at least one nasal, in fact I have yet to come across any language that doesn't have a na sound, and at least one liquid. Vowels are also counted as resonants. Every language in the world features at least two vowels. Some, like Arabic and Yupik Inuit, have only 3 vowels. Some Native American languages have 4 vowels, but by far the most common layout is the classic 5-vowel system, which is common in every language family on every continent. Some languages, like Turkish, have as many as 8 vowels, and some languages go even further than that. As much as we'd like to think that English has 5 vowels, it actually has something more like 20. How many sounds your language has is entirely up to you. Some languages, like Hawaiian, Rotokas, and Mohawk, have less than a dozen consonants in their entire phonology, while others, like Ubich and Ta, have over 100. Most languages will have somewhere between 20 to 30 sounds. It's always best to err on the side of too few sounds, as a smaller inventory will be easier to work with and help give your language a more distinct and recognizable phonetic character. Plus, there'll be plenty of opportunity to add or remove sounds as we evolve the language further. Once we've chosen our sounds, we can compile all of them into a single chart. So, for our sample language, we'll start out with the basic sounds. Pa, ta, and ka are extraordinarily common, as are ma and na. For now, we won't include any voiced sounds, but that can be remedied later if we want. As for fricatives, sa is extremely common, so we're safe including that, and the glottal fricative ha is fairly common too. But just for fun, let's throw in something a little less common, like the lateral fricative hla. This is a pretty rare sound, but it can be found in Welsh, Zulu, and Navajo. For affricates, let's throw in a tsa, which is a fairly common affricate, and matches the other alveolar sounds we've got. Cha is also extremely common, but I'm choosing to omit it for simplicity, and I'll need it to help illustrate something later on. Keeping the idea of sound symmetry in mind, we might also want to throw in the lateral affricate kla to match the lateral fricative. Again, we're not using any voiced obstruents at the moment, so we won't include za or dza, or la or dla. There are many different variations of R-like sounds, from ra to ra to ra, or even ra, but the most common is the simple tapped ra, so we'll use that one. L also has a bunch of different variations, like la and lia and la, but we'll stick to the basic la. Finally, let's throw in wa and ya, both very common sounds, and voila, we have our consonant chart. As for the vowels, we'll just use the basic 5-vowel system since it's the most common. I'm also going to throw in vowel length as a contrastive feature. A long vowel usually sounds more or less the same as its short equivalent, just held about twice as long. Having a distinction between long and short vowels is extremely common across the world. English kind of has long vowels, but they only appear in specific phonetic environments. Compare the pronunciation of back versus bag. However, languages like Latin, Finnish, or Mongolian pay much closer attention to whether a vowel is long or short. Long vowels will be useful later on, so we'll include a long version of every one of our 5 vowels. So there we have it. Here's our finalized sound chart. It's pretty basic, but it'll serve us well when we make the proto-language. But as you'll see, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for modification later. Now for a quick note on romanization. You may have some IPA symbols that aren't practical to use when transcribing your language, so you'll have to choose easier characters to represent these sounds. It is strongly advisable to choose symbols to represent these sounds that are as easy as possible to interpret. For our language, let's represent the y sound with a y rather than a j, as most English speakers would mistake that for a j. Other than that, the only sounds our language has that are a bit unwieldy to write down in the IPA are the lateral fricative and affricate. Most readers would have no idea what sound to make for these symbols, and it would be a real pain to have to look up and copy and paste these symbols every time we wanted to use them. Instead, let's simply represent them with HL and TL respectively. These are what we call digraphs, where a single sound is represented with multiple characters. Now, written as digraphs, these might be misconstrued as consonant clusters, so someone might be tempted to read atla as atla. but as long as we detail this in our romanization system, and have a way of potentially disambiguating any similar consonant clusters that occur, we should be fine. And then there's the issue of representing long vowels. A frequent way to do this is by simply writing the vowel character twice to indicate that you hold it for twice the length. Superficially, that does seem to make sense, but unfortunately, English's weird spelling system means that more often than not, an English speaker will interpret a double E not as E, but as E, and double O not as O, but as OO. There are a couple of ways around this, but I'm going to take the simple way out and just use vowels with macrons, just as Latin does. But we're not out of the woods just yet. A language's phonology is more than just a collection of sounds. Every language has a series of rules that governs how sounds can be put together. This is part of the reason that languages have recognizable phonetic qualities. We can often make a pretty good guess at what language a person is speaking, even if we don't speak it ourselves. The first and most basic rule to set is syllable shape. Any given syllable consists of up to 3 segments: the onset, the consonant that begins the syllable; the nucleus, the part of the syllable capable of receiving stress, which is almost always a vowel; and the coda, the consonant that ends the syllable, if there is one. Keep in mind, for a consonant to qualify as a coda, it needs to precede the onset of another syllable, or appear at the end of a word. If a syllable has no coda, it's called an open syllable, and if it does have a coda, it's called a closed syllable. About 1/8 of the world's languages don't allow codas at all. Hawaiian, Swahili, and Guarani consist only of open syllables. Some languages, like Siglitun and many Asian languages, only allow a very small number of consonants to serve as a coda. Most European languages are considered highly complex in terms of codas, like English's notoriously dreadful strengths and angsts. And some languages go even further than that. It is possible, if not likely, that your syllable shape will change as you evolve the language. To illustrate this, and to keep it simple, I'm going to say that our proto-language is going to consist of purely open syllables. Another rule you want to establish early on is how the stress system works. In most languages, a certain syllable of any given word will receive the stress. Some languages have a fixed stress system. That is, stress always falls on the same syllable in every word, no matter what. In other languages, changing the stress can change the meaning of the word. Compare the English present versus present. And in yet others, which syllable is stressed depends on the phonetic environment. In a language like Latin, the third to last syllable receives the stress, unless the second to last syllable contains a long vowel or has a coda, in which case it receives the stress. Since our sample proto-language consists of purely open syllables, we don't have to worry about coda consonants. Let's just say that the stress always falls on the third to last syllable unless the second to last syllable contains a long vowel. And there we have it, one proto-phonology. Now we have everything we need to start coining words. Join me next time when we'll start figuring out how to put words together.